Hey guys, this is Artie, and I have Carl and Marcy with me. Can you guys wave and say hello?
Hello.
They're just very small people today. They're the size of postage stamps. Um, Today we're in the middle of our health project, and it's really easy to think of health as just how do you count the right number of calories and make sure that you get the right number of steps. And what we have with us here are two subject matter experts that really are knee deep into this stuff and thinking about health at a more uh, wide way than just inside of this very narrow bandwidth we typically think of health and technology. We have Carl from Cincy Tech and Marcy from Clarigent Health. Cincy Tech is an organization that helps foster entrepreneurship inside of the Cincinnati region. And Marcy is at Clarigent Health, which, Marcy, you guys are based in Mason, is that correct?
Correct. Yes, in Mason.
Yep. Great. They're based in Mason, just outside of Cincinnati, or kind of in the Cincinnati greater area, doing some really interesting stuff around technology and health. So I'm going to kind of sit back, let these guys take it away, and I'll ask questions as we go. Does that sound good, Carl?
Sounds great.
Marcy?
Great.
Great. Awesome. Take it over, guys.
So just a brief introduction for Cincy Tech before we move on to Clarigent. So Cincy Tech is a local, hyper-local venture capital firm here in Cincinnati. And the reason it's sort of relevant to this conversation is about half of our ideas that we invest in, or the companies we invest in, are health-focused companies. And that's whether it's medical drugs, devices, diagnostic tools, et cetera. I mean, what we do is we provide key capital and entrepreneurial support to those companies. Marcy from Clarigent is an example. And my role specifically is to help bring students into that fold, help give you exposure into what we're doing, both in the startup companies, what Cincy Tech is doing, and create opportunity for you to do project work, find internships, et cetera. Marcy actually at Clarigent has a couple internships and some project work that's open now. What we're doing with students in particular, you can go to cincytechstudents.com and also sign up to hear more. But my role, my background is actually got a history degree, went out, worked in DC for a while, was part of building a new graduate school out there, came back to Cincinnati and ended up getting an MBA at UC and then working for Cincy Tech and getting really excited about this role of creating connection between students and student engagement with Cincy Tech and our startup portfolio. We create opportunities such as bringing Marcy into the classroom, or in this case, into their videos to talk with you. So I'll let Marcy talk now about Clarigent, sort of Clarigent's, what they're doing with digital and health. And then after that, I'll touch on a few other of our portfolio companies as other examples of what we're doing. So Marcy.
Great. First of all, thank you all for having me here today. I'm thrilled to be talking to Artie's class and the students. You can see I have my Miami hat on. I went to Boston College, but I have a strong connection to Miami. My son went there and had a great experience, so I'm really happy to be talking to the students today.
Go Red Hawks. Go Red Hawks, Marcy.
Go Red Hawks. My background, computer science and math, was a software engineer for many years. And then decided to take a turn and went more into, I'll call it technical product management. And so worked at a variety of companies, some that were educationally focused, some that were health focused, some that were IoT focused. But the company I'm at right now, I've been with Clarigent Health for 3 years. It's a digital mental health company. And so I'll describe a little bit more as we go along, but my role there is VP of products. It's a very exciting role. I kind of get to be that interpreter between understanding what the market and the business wants to build or needs, and then working with the developers, designers to make that happen. So very, very exciting role. So on to the next slide. Okay, so what I talk to you about today is the really unique opportunity we had at Clarigent Health. And so there's various different ways that startups spark or get their idea on what to build. But for us, we wanted to commercialize scientific research. So this began many years ago, 10 years in fact, with Dr. John Peshtian, who has a bioinformatics lab at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So the work he did, he began to work with suicide notes, and he has today the largest collection of them in the world. And he wanted to understand or be able to see if he could build a model to see if we could identify if a suicide note was actually true or not. And so he and his lab built a classifier that was able to tell if a note was in fact true from someone or if it was one that was made up. So that got him thinking more and more about, okay, can we find out earlier? So is there actually a language of suicide that when someone speaks, we're able to identify those characteristics? And so he and his team took that initial idea and worked to build a classifier. And they have 3 clinical trials and published papers on that, where they worked with Cincinnati Children's Hospital Emergency Department, and then they did a multi-site trial with Cincinnati Children's, University of Cincinnati, and West Virginia Hospital. And what they did there was be able to see if when someone presented with ideation, as opposed to someone who did not, let's say a broken bone, could they build a model to identify as well as a doctor or a mental health professional? And they were able to do that with about high 89, 90% accuracy. So that right there is what people call a very strong signal. There's enough there to say, okay, this may have some utility in the commercial market. And so Clarigent Health was formed about 3 years ago, and Don Wright is our CEO. And for those of you that have been following the startup community ecosystem in Cincinnati for some time, Don was one of the original founders of AssureX Health. So that was an early stage company that once again took science that came out of Children's Hospital Mayo Clinic. And the problem they were trying to solve is what happens if how can you identify medicines that someone will need to be taking, but which medicines work best? So in other words, there are ways in which we metabolize medicine, but if someone is diagnosed, let's say, with bipolar or depression or whatever mental health diagnosis they have, there are many medicines that are potentially able to help with that. But because of who we are in our DNA, we metabolize things differently. So that company was able to be able to identify which drugs work best or which ones don't work at all with someone. That company was sold 3 years ago to Myriad. Today, it's one of the largest exits out of Ohio to a public company. And so that successful exit is one that people look up to a lot as to how they started with an idea in a garage and took it to over 500 employees. Today, it has tested over 1.5 million people and has really made a strong impact on the mental health market today. So the reason I mentioned that is because while Don was building AssureX, a lot of the research that was done on the work that we're doing at Clarigent Health was sponsored or funded by AssureX, because they knew there was some potential that, okay, we are helping these individuals, but we need to find out a way to understand whether or not it's working or not. So this idea of, could we test someone's language to measure whether or not the treatment is working? And so a lot of that was funded there. But in the meantime, Myriad bought AssureX Health, and at that time, Myriad did not want anything that was not already commercialized. So the science went back to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So jump forward to 3 years ago, and Clarigent Health was formed, and technology was then transferred to our company. We licensed that technology, and our goal was to see how best we could commercialize that. So Clarigent Health came together, and this is our mission: early detection of behavioral health issues, resulting in individualized treatment and better medical management, resulting in improvement in quality of life and reduction of cost to both systems and families. So I want to say a few things about that. So, this is a very big mission, but it is always very helpful to have that huge target way out in front of you to kind of keep you pushing forward. Initially, we're going to be seeing how we can best use this in use cases, but ultimately, it's not just about testing, but it's about testing so we can inform the science to be able to have better quality of life. Next slide. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about the problem. I'm sure everyone is pretty familiar with the problem. It's, very well described in media, and I think in just common terms. But I mean, when I started with this company, I really was alarmed by the numbers. And so, if you look at this, it's the second leading cause of death of ages 10 to 34. 50,000 people die by suicide annually. $69 billion is the cost that it is to the United States. What's alarming, one person every 11 minutes and one every 40 seconds worldwide. And the latest stat that came out that really is even propelling us even stronger to kind of work hard at the company is the 5 to 12-year-old rate of suicide has tripled in 9 years. So, it used to be something that, years ago was affecting people that were older as a result of prolonged, mental health problems or trauma, whatever it may be. But now it's really starting to take a hold on individuals that are younger. So it's just telling us more and more, we need to figure out a way to get to this earlier. So our solution to this problem is to create what we've coined behavioral health vital sign. So it's very understood that in any medical issue, measuring your vital signs is a very good way to measure whether or not you have a condition, you're presenting with something, or if you're getting better. So why not have something like this in mental health? And so the problem we're seeing today is that the way in which things are measured or assessed is using scales. So there are a series of questions that a mental health professional asks you, but you can only imagine in that scenario, it's very subjective. And so the scales rely on how well someone wants to answer that. The scales rely on how well this professional interprets those answers. So why can't we come up with an objective measure that will not be influenced by bias on either of those? Now, where could we impact? So I have this diagram out here to kind of show you one of the reasons this is becoming so important today and why it will impact the whole, I'll say, health system infrastructure. What's happening today is many times because we don't have things in place, if there is a concern for someone at a very high risk of suicide or very high risk of mental health, what happens is they're just being pushed right to the emergency department. The emergency department is the most expensive place for someone to be taken care of, but more importantly, it is not the best place to have someone being taken care of if they're suffering from mental health issues. Emergency department was originally designed to deal with medical problems. And so think about it, you go into there, you got bright lights, you've got people moving around fast, you've got people coming at you, sticking and prodding things with that. That is not a good experience for someone experiencing mental health issues. And so what we believe we can do is be able to take this tool, this assessment tool, and push it out into the community. So the assessment can be done out in the community and only take those to the emergency department that really need to be there, but be able to take individuals and bring them to other agencies, other outpatients, other things in the community where they can best be served. Next slide. Okay, so our differentiator, like I mentioned before, what we have today is very subjective. You have these scales that are just a series of questions. They've been around for a long, long time. And when you really understand these scales, many of these, and first and foremost, the one that is used for suicide, was designed by pharmaceutical companies to use in their clinical research to take people out of their research who were experiencing suicide ideation. So that is all we have today, something that was designed for pharmaceutical trials to take people out. And we're using it today to figure out who has suicide ideation. So, I mean, it's right there. The intent of it, the reason of it is not suited for what we need today. Where what we're proposing is an objective measure that is something that can be done during the therapy itself. Those of you, you're in an education setting today, and I've been in the education market for a long, long time. I relate this a lot to when you are learning. What is happening today in the education world is that there's a lot of formative assessment going on. While you're learning, you are forming and understanding whether or not you're getting it or not. Your teachers are forming and understanding whether you're getting it or not. So your instructors, your teachers, your educators are able to provide more faster feedback to you so that you don't wait till the very end when you take a test at the end of the quarter to understand whether or not you've got it or not. Same thing applies here. You can form an opinion, form an understanding whether or not someone is suffering from mental health crisis conditions while they're while they're being talked to, rather than saying, okay, let's stop and now take a test. So it's that same type of thing that we believe can really help in this mental health arena. Next slide. So the science behind all this is really interesting. And many of you are, I'm sure, very aware on a day-to-day basis of how we are all being affected by vocal AI. You all use Siri, you all use all your, your talking devices. And the original use of this was to be able to identify commands and be able to react to those commands. This science has propelled even further, so much so that now there is technology around not just recognizing words, but being able to measure how someone speaks and be able to attribute that to medical and mental health conditions. So your brain, your muscular system, your positive, I'm sorry, I've got that spelled wrong, respiratory system. Respiratory system is something, and those three systems work together to allow you to speak. It's a very complicated thing that happens. So imagine, you can imagine that if anything has changed in your brain, your emotional state, if anything is changing muscular wise, if anything's changing in your respiratory system, you are going to be speaking differently. That's logical. Okay. So with the science, what science is really good at, what machine learning is really good at, is measuring things. So we now are able to measure those changes. Go on to the next slide. And so diseases impact physiology, and they create involuntary changes that can be detected and measured. So a very good example, let's say, is dementia. It's very easy for people to understand. When people falling into dementia, they're going to speak differently. When people are starting to experience Parkinson's or anything else that is physiologically and neurologically connected, we're able to understand that that's easy to understand. That's easy to detect a difference. But because of the science today, depression, bipolar, anxiety, those are also conditions that can be detected. Next slide. And so what it's coined today as vocal biomarkers. And so scientists have discovered these, and everyone is working very hard to create various diagnostic tools. There are tools out there on the market today that can detect whether or not you are starting to incur, I'll say, early heart attack conditions through your voice. There are tools out there today that can tell if someone's starting to get COPD. So there's a lot of really interesting diagnostic tools out there that are taking advantage of this science. So our opportunity is very large. We can help schools, hospitals, primary care, and outpatient. And so in schools, as we start to do our early research on this, we started to talk to a variety of people, anyone from the emergency department through all these various different sectors. And over again, people kept telling us this really needs to be pushed upstream, because the earlier we find out, the better. So in a school setting, if you can imagine, the schools are starting to be affected by the uprising in needs for mental health for their students. They're starting to understand that students can only be ready to learn and do their best if they are physically and mentally ready to learn. And so schools are starting to bring more mental health services to their students. What we're seeing today is that schools are creating partnerships with mental health agencies. These therapists are being embedded in those schools. And so they're seeing many of those students on a day-to-day basis. The statistics to say that 1 in 5 people are affected by mental health. And so what we are trying to see is that the schools are trying to provide enough services so that they can help those 1 in 5 students. So we are in clinical trials today in schools where we are bringing our technology through the mental health therapists that's in the schools. And while they're having a therapy session with these students, they are recording this conversation, and we are bringing that audio back to our lab and being able to build the models out of that. Hospital settings, there's a huge need there. We're working today with WakeMed Hospital System. What the hospital systems are starting to do is they are starting to look at the system as a whole. And it's not just the ED and inpatient. They are considering the entire system. Everything from when someone first has a touch point at the 911 system to being brought into via ambulance, to their urgent care centers, to their hospital systems, to their outpatient systems, to their food pantries. They're looking at that whole system, and they have readily recognized that behavioral health, mental health affects someone's outcomes on medical health. So they then are starting to understand we need to know sooner and we need to know the intensity level of individuals' mental health so we can serve them best. And so they're looking at an entire ecosystem. With WakeMed, we are beginning, we've started a clinical trial with them where we will be bringing this system to them. They're starting it in the emergency department. And then once we get through that pilot, we will then be placing this system at their primary care centers, at their outpatient mental health clinics, at their 911 call systems to help them stratify where this individual can best be served. Primary care settings, you can go back. Primary care settings is another great place that we are going to begin to work in. Your primary care doctor, your pediatrician, when they went through med school, they were not trained specifically on mental health. But Joint Commission, which is a sanctioned agency that in essence tells medical professionals what they need to be focused on, they now are telling these primary care pediatricians, you now need to screen every day for mental health. And so we need to help augment what they are doing and make it so they can still get the job done they're supposed to get done, but also bring to them additional information that can allow them to best serve their patients by identifying mental health concerns. Outpatient behavioral health, individuals that need that critical care. A really strong thing we need there is to be able to watch over time to see, is this treatment working? And so measuring that is very important. And also, when is someone done? It's very interesting as you look into the system today. If you have a physical ailment, let's say you broke your arm, you're going to then get physical therapy to get better. There is a time when you know you are done with physical therapy and you go back to your normal life. Today, what's happening is once you get into a mental health professional, there really are no guidelines as to say, when am I done? So many times what happens is people continue to stay on with their behavioral health therapist because it's just comfortable and they just stay on with them. So when you really look at the system as a whole, we are overrun with the need for behavioral health, but maybe could it be that we just aren't using our resources appropriately? Maybe some people are ready to step down so other people who need behavioral health can get into that behavioral health professional. And those that are stepping down, we can find other ways to help them now that they're not needing that intense therapy. So as you can see, what I try to describe here, that this technology that we've been given has utility across all of these, but as a startup, we can't do them all. And so this is one thing that's really important to become a successful startup, is to try to really stay focused and figure out where are we needed most, where is the timing right, and then go after that one and prove that you can work, and then start to spread out from there. Next slide. Okay, so I want to kind of show you what this might look like. So today we're in a trial, and what we're using in the trials is what I call kind of a data collection. And so I described to you that we're in school settings today, we're at WakeMed Hospital System, and so the app is very simple. From the front end, merely what it does is it listens in, and once it listens in, it will then ask the mental health professional to provide their perception of what happened during that meeting. So what we are asking for this therapist to do is they need to collect speech from this individual for about 6 minutes. And what we need to collect is something that will allow them to elicit their emotions and feelings. And the way we ask them to do that is to probe into 5 areas: hope, fears, secrets, anger, and emotional pain. So if they kind of probe in those areas, it has been proven through published research with Dr. Peshtin that it gets someone to kind of reveal their emotions and feelings. And then what we do on the back end, we then are taking those 1-minute segments, bringing it up to the cloud. We then are using natural language processing services. And what I mean by that is we're using a diarization service, which in those fancy terms, what it really means is it splits the speakers apart, because we need to know the audio that's coming in, who is the mental health professional and who is the client or who is that patient. Then once we have just that patient or client's words, we then use natural language processing to transcribe that. And once we transcribe that, we send that data then onto our AI or our machine learning modules. And what it does is it pulls out the characteristics. Now, what I mean by characteristics, there are many characteristics in someone's voice. And I split them into three types. One is acoustic, and acoustic means just, the pitch. What does someone's tone sound like? What is someone's, do they speak fast? What's the energy? There are waveform measurements that can measure all of that. Then there's also linguistic measurements. So that is, how is someone forming the way they speak? Do they use more personal pronouns than nouns? Do they use more absolutist words? What words are they using together? So it's not just, how do they answer something like a command, but it's how they are forming those words. And then there's also affect, and it is emotional feelings that are usually connected to certain words. And so, this is usually a happy word. This is usually a sad word. So within those three areas, there are hundreds of things you can measure in each of those. And so where it gets the complicated part is identifying or discovering which of those characteristics are the ones that are most indicative of the mental health conditions that we are trying to measure. And those are the ones that become part of the secret sauce for what will be our machine learning model. And so once this therapist completes this recording, we have one very simple screen that allows them to measure, like I said, the perception of that meeting. And so we ask them to put in their overall distress. We then ask them if that patient client presented with any of these mental health states. So if they appeared aggressive, if they appeared anxious, if they appeared depressed, and so on, they go into each of those buttons and they simply use a slider that we have that is designed to measure levels 1 through 5, the intensity of those. And then we also ask them to kind of identify what actions were taken. So did they call the parents? Did they call the hospital? Did they refer them to further evaluation? And so that gives us all the information we need to also kind of augment what we're hearing in the voice. Okay, next slide. So where we're going with this in the future. So today we are not returning a value. Today we are still validating this model that is bringing back. When you work in the science arena, it's very important that you have what's known as the sensitivity and the specificity in your measurement so that a doctor can feel confident in what you're bringing back. And so we just need a little bit more data to make sure that we have the confidence to be able to do that. And we anticipate that will be done by the second half of this year. So what we are designing right now is if someone is talking to this individual, what will be brought back is that we will tell them the risk that they are hearing, that we are hearing in their voice, could be a low, medium, high. And we also are working with the idea of bringing back the most common words that someone is saying, because not only do we want to give them a measurement back, but we also want to help that therapist as what did we hear in that conversation that could help them probe more, can help them understand what they can do to help that individual. If you look into the science, humans only remember about 20% of what they hear. So if the machine can help that therapist remember more what they're hearing, it can allow them to be a more effective therapist. Next slide. And then what we are going to do, taking it past that, in talking to our users, potential stakeholders, not only is important to understand point in time what someone is experiencing, but even more important is creating a baseline or creating trends for someone. As you can imagine, a lot of people have various different baselines because we're all very different human beings. And so it's very important to understand where someone is moving. Are they moving up? Or are they moving down? I mentioned before the need to be able to start to have someone step down out of therapy. This will give them the confidence to be able to show them that, yes, you really are getting better. You're getting, we're meeting our goals or outcomes that we had set. And so this is very important. And just basic understanding that how can we measure anything if we don't have data? And so this is going to allow us to have that objective measure that we can work with in a variety of ways. Another way that we plan to use it, for example, down in the Wake Med, they just need very simple information. Admit this patient or don't admit this patient. If they're out in the field, with a crisis team, send them to the hospital, or no, we can divert them to something else. And so it's very important to understand that on the back end, we have the same model working, but how it's presented on the front depends who needs that information and how and what they need to make their action, their behavior. And so that's why I wanted to show you these different ways in which this will be brought to fruition. Next. So the other thing that we've discovered, so it's very interesting, and this is what's so fun about building product is, our original goal when we set forth is that, okay, our sweet spot is, our differentiator is to bring back this objective measure. As we started to really do this and bring this out and talk to people, and I will tell you as a product person, and if you're going into this field, it is so important to get out of the office and talk to your users, your stakeholders, as much as you can, because it's the place where you will discover what truly is needed and how you're going to be able to fit into their workflows. So what we started to understand that very basic things that we have in very different industries, your basic dashboard of bringing information back to someone as to how many people are in this condition, how many people are in this, that allows someone at an aggregate level to understand what needs, how do I need to resource certain things, is not really there in mental health. And so just bringing that to them will allow them to work more efficiently and productively. And so, for instance, if I'm working, let's say, with and mental health agencies, and they, let's say, have therapists in 8 different schools, and out in the schools are 26 therapists working with 50 clients who have done 123 sessions, I'm able to say at the aggregate level for that agency, here's the overall distress of what you're looking at. Here is where they are in the scale for suicidal or for aggression. Here's what's happened to these individuals. Did they get sent home? Did we call the therapist? But what's even more important is that we can drill down into these and say, okay, what does this look like at this particular school? What does this look like for this particular therapist? So then those that are supporting those individuals can help give them services to do their job better, or even resource more individuals out there. So without information, we can't act intelligently. So this is something that we're also going to be working towards in getting this information out. Next slide. So how might we, and you can go ahead and bring that on, in a medical checkup, it's very intuitive. It's very known. It's very accepted that when you come in with a stomach ache, you come in with pains and aches, a doctor just not look at you and just say, I think you have XYZ. They rely very heavily on tools. They listen to your heart, they take your blood pressure, they send you out for an MRI. All those things do not diagnose, but they give that doctor information that allows them to make better informed decisions. If you can click one more time. So why can't we, in a mental health setting, provide a tool that will be able to kind of help that therapist look inside by using machine learning to be able to not diagnose, but help that therapist be better informed. What I tell people a lot is that a therapist is excellent at qualitatively understanding what is going on. Through their experience, they can be a really good interviewer. They can help someone pull out. They can do the therapy. What machines are really good at is counting. They can count up the number of times that someone says a personal pronoun more than a proper pronoun. They can count up the number of times that someone uses absolutist words. They can count up the number of times these words are said next to each other. They can relieve that work from the therapist to allow them to do qualitatively work better, and then know that the machine can provide that information for them. Next slide. Okay, I'm done. So at this point, just want to kind of take any questions. Artie, I'll allow you to kind of act on behalf of the students if you have any questions there.
Yeah, totally. So Marcy, what's been some of the challenges that you've discovered as you got out? I loved how you were talking about how important it is for you to get out of your office into talking to your actual users. What have been some surprises or challenges that came as a result of that?
Okay. One of the biggest things is, when you are working in a startup that requires evidence, it is very hard to get that data. And so right now, because when we go out, like I told you, we are working with a trial inside of a school system right now. For us to be able to do that, we have to write what's called a protocol, and that protocol is a definition of exactly what we're going to do when we are conducting human subject clinical trials, studies on humans. That has to be, there has to be a medical doctor that's overseeing all that. There has to be medical monitors that watching everything that's going on. We have to document everything. That's a very long process to get approved. And then it's a very long process then to have, once that's done, part of that, we have to have what's known as a consent. And a consent means that we have to inform the individual that's going to be providing themselves to us in this clinical trial. We have to explain to them exactly what we're going to do, tell them about any things that could happen, and then they have to give their written permission. When you're working with adolescents or children, it's complicated even more because you have to get the parental permission and you have to get that child's assent to say, yes, I can do that. So you have to go through all those layers, which are absolutely necessary, but it just makes it harder than if we were creating an app for someone to order food online. You just go out, you write, you develop the coolest app ever, and you go out and try it and see if it works. So there's a lot of layers that you have to make sure that's in there. And at the same time, too, people, are not always readily about giving their data. With voice, I will guarantee you in about a year from now, when we're talking again, this is going to be so much more well understood. But see, people right now are still skeptical. What's going to happen to my voice? How's it going to be stored? Is it going to, how secure is it? What are you going to do with that? All those types of questions. When you think back years ago, before blood tests were being drawn for everything, when those first came out, people are like, you're not taking my blood. What are you going to do with that blood? What's going to happen to it? Who are you going to give? All that kind of stuff. And now it's a very accepted practice. Of course, take my blood, run all the tests with it, and then I know that you'll be able to tell me the information that I need to know about what's going on inside of me. The voice is going to become a very similar biomarker, but it just takes time to kind of make that accepted, much more accepted. So that's been a challenge, and getting our trials out there. The next challenge is we are really pushing the edges of science, of technology. And so it sounds very doable that, yes, you just put a recording down between two people, you do a recording, transcribe it, you send that to the model. Okay, so we are trying to put a smartphone app between someone to have them talk into this. The technology on a phone, the technology on the microphones are only as good as someone is in, I would say, logistical distance to that microphone. So, and background noise, over talking, all of those things that make a good audio quality, we have to control. So you kind of have to work with that. Transcription services. I'm sure many of you have used Siri or Google or anything else, and every once in a while it makes a mistake. Oh, I didn't quite say that. So, they're getting better and better every day, but the transcription is, still has a ways to go to get that, perfected. So, there's some technology challenges along the way that we're working with. And so those are other challenges. I'd say the other ahas as we go out there is really understanding how someone works. And so, in a therapy session, what was really interesting when we first started doing this research, everyone has probably used various recording apps on their phone. And it's very user experience wise. Everyone knows what a red circle is. That means you record. Everyone knows what the little, diamonds are. That means you stop. Okay, you put that in the app we're creating. It's kind of makes someone uneasy because it's a very constant reminder that we're recording you. So we had to really do some work in the user experience area to understand that we really want to present this as we're listening in. We are helping the therapist. So we, changed to very soft colors. We changed to like wavelengths going on rather than these harsh kind of symbology, so that, people can kind of understand what we're really working with. So I'd say the visual message, the verbal message that we're doing has to be very carefully crafted to kind of really help people understand what we're trying to do.
That's fantastic. I have a couple other questions, but I also want to honor Carl's time. Carl, I know you only have about 8 minutes until you have to jet. And I know that we would love to hear more about some additional companies that are relevant to this that Cincy Tech has. So let's switch gears, and then if Marcy, if a little bit more time, you and I can switch back to some other questions I have. Does that work?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so Cincy Tech invests in, like I said, about half of our companies are health-based. And so I just want to give about 4 examples of companies that we are invested in that sort of give a different perspective on how you can approach healthcare and where the digital and technology really come into play. And the first one, actually, the reason I'm going to have to jet to is to talk to the founder of Include Health. And they are creating a cloud-based accessible fitness sort of regime. And the initial problem actually came from a capstone project where Ryan Eder, the founder, saw someone in a wheelchair trying to use a fitness machine. He's like, I can create an accessible fitness machine. He did that. He designed one, ended up throwing it into some competitions just as a design and won. And that from that sort of inspired and led to what we see Include Health today. And what this connected accessible fitness system allows for is if you think about it in a physical therapy environment where right now, if you're a physical therapist, they might make a few notes on paper, maybe they'll record it and so forth. But it's very sort of inefficient. Here now with like a Bluetooth badge, you walk up to the machine and it recognizes who you are. It tracks it and throws that information in the cloud. And you can sort of see in the image there, you've got, how many reps, calories, minutes, but as well, how fast you're moving it, what's the force, and the distance, right? And that's going to really help how you do physical therapy. And then on top of that, you add in a planning component in that cloud system, so you can show and create progress. Which is, this is, I think, is very relevant to me because I have some messed up shoulders and that I'm actually seeing a physical therapist for. But this is a great one, and I encourage anybody who's interested in this to check out their website. They have a really cool website. Equine Systems, another completely different approach to health here. Marcy was talking about vocal biomarkers. Sweat sensing wearable. So if you think about how right now when you take ibuprofen, it says 2 pills for adults. It doesn't really take into account your how you digest medicine, your size, etc. It's 2 pills for me, 2 pills for Marcy, 2 pills for Artie, and maybe 1 pill for someone much younger. In this, Ekin through not for ibuprofen, for more serious drugs, is looking how can they analyze and look at how your body is reacting to that medicine, so that you can affect the dose better, reduce adverse reactions, as well as increase adherence. Non-adherence to drug regimens is a huge cost on the system. And if you can make it more efficient, then you're reducing the amount that you're going to be paying in the long run for your treatment. Ready, Set, Surgical. So when you think healthcare, you tend to think, the drugs or the diagnostics or the tools that you use. Ready Set's actually a software that helps with the logistics behind the surgery and the supply chain. So if you think about when you start surgery and maybe they don't have the right equipment there at the right time, Ready Set really helps creates a cloud-based dashboard and monitors from the vendor of the inventory all the way through sterilization into the surgical team to make sure that everything is where it's supposed to be when it should be, which really makes more efficient the surgery, reduces costs again, and also makes it more if you think about for the patient, make sure that you're getting the right implants or the right devices for that surgery. And then lastly, on other examples of projects, companies that will invest in Enable Injections. So think of a problem right now, high volume biologic drugs that have to be delivered through infusion. So whether you go to a clinic or a hospital, maybe you have to do it every month because it's a regular periodic drug dose that you need. That takes a lot of time as well from your schedule. Also, it's kind of obvious if you always have to take the time out from work. It can be sort of a social isolation to some degree. So what Enable has done is they've created a device that lets you administer the drug yourself, and it's a little circle thing. And as you can see in the picture there, There's adhesive. You stick it to your body. You press the button. A needle that you never even see goes in, and you inject the drug directly. Put your shirt down. You can be walking around on campus doing it. So it's really going to help in potential to really disrupt the infusion market, because you no longer will have to go to a healthcare facility, and therefore free up a lot of those resources for other medical needs. And what's neat about this is it will be each one's designed for the drug, and so so when you say you go to the pharmacy, get your drug, the devices then are given with it, and it's just a single-use device as well. So another really cool one. You can check out their website. And if you think about, so I think it's the project already, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is to be thinking about, so what other health care, where might things be going in the future? And so this is just a list of just a few things that are sort of on the horizon that people are thinking about. Performance-based foods, plant-based foods. You've probably seen the Beyond Burgers when they went public. Agribusiness, 80 acres here in the area. Sleep tech, whether it's from the Casper mattresses being sent to you, or the auto sleep apps and so forth, or the Aura Ring, if anybody's heard of that, which tracks your sleep and helps create sort of numbers for you so that you can get a better night's sleep. Women's health is a huge thing. At the moment, a lot of healthcare hasn't been it's either been sort of one size fits all, or maybe tailored towards men, but women have much different needs, and so you see growth in there. Telemedicine, digital healthcare. If anybody has that Doctor Health, I think Doctor app, where you can get sort of instead of having to always go to your primary care physician, you can now get sort of basic needs on an app or electronically. And then lastly, like cybersecurity. If you think from the cybersecurity perspective, as everything becomes more tech-based, and Marcy might even have a comment about this in the Clarigent space, as things become digital, cybersecurity is going to become an issue that's going to be affecting healthcare. It already affects healthcare, but now it's going to just become more visible, right? So I don't know if you have any.
I think this last slide is phenomenal and super helpful when thinking about these sort of things. Carl, do you need to go right now, or do you have time for a couple questions?
Let me just send him a quick text message, and he knows I am going to run a few minutes late.
Great. While Carl's doing that, I'm going to ask a question for kind of both of you guys, and I think this is kind of what we'll probably wrap up with, and that is, we can kind of see how digital technology is being deployed for healthcare right now, and we can kind of see where it's going. Marcy, you kind of alluded to, well, people are going to get used to their voice being a biomarker, or Carl, you put together this slide of, 7 items that seem like space where you could move into. But I would just, if we could get into a DeLorean and jump into the future 10 years, where do you guys picture healthcare and taking care of people kind of moving towards? If you could just kind of put on your prognostication hats, what can you kind of picture how it would be different than it is today? It doesn't need to be necessarily in the doctor's office. It might be just at home.
I mean, Marcy's probably going to have a much better prediction than I do, but I think you're going to see it much. I have performance-based foods, plant-based foods up there, and I think you're going to see a much more direction towards diet. I'm going to see and lifestyle and things that are more preventative rather than treatment-based. Right now, and even you see with the mental health app that Marcy's working on, it's more how do we get in front of the problem. A lot of our healthcare at the moment is a lot about treating problems rather than preventing them to begin with.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other thing I'm seeing too, I'll say kind of like short term is that what we're seeing is that there's a lot of siloed information. And so there's going to be the ability to kind of bring this together, and understanding that someone's, what I will call their risk factors will be combined with their resiliency factors, and understanding more holistically. And so, which will fall right into what is being experienced now in health with the value-based care, as opposed to the way it's been done in the past, or up to today, where you're just paying for a number of visits to the doctor. And so, they're going to start, it's going to be like project work. Okay, you've got a project to fix this patient, and then pull together whatever resources you need. And it's going to be everything from things in the community to, and so for that to happen, we're starting to see, I'd say Wake Med, where we're down now, is way out in front of this. They have, like I said, connected everything from a food pantry and a church to the 911 system, and being able to say, how can we all work together in one big community? And so technology is going to enable us to kind of see how those things are going to work together. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's funny to me sometimes when I see these hospitals building these brick and mortar buildings all over the place. I don't really know if we're going to need that as much as ways in which to have people be remotely monitored and bring a bunch of data together from that point.
I definitely think it has to get more holistic. And you even see sleep on that list there. I mean, at this point, I already identified sleep as being a wonder drug to some degree, right? And yet it's not something that's focused on. But imagine your healthcare, if you start, health insurance, if we start tracking things like people's food and sleep and all of that, how much that might reduce the burden on the health system.
Yeah, but there's probably, in the meantime, I think there's going to be a lot of noise, and it's always like trying to find the true thing through the noise. So if you look right now on, the App Store, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of apps, and everyone's just throwing them out there with not a lot of evidence behind them, just to track this, that, and everything. And so what do you do with the information from those? It's a lot of noise for you. So, we've got to think of ways to intelligently bring the information together, and who should be seeing what information, and how do we use that information? For instance, we talked to CAMH, which was a hospital system up in Canada. They believe they have a gene that will be able to tell whether or not someone has a tendency for being suicidal. Okay, ethically, should we even do that? I mean, how's that going to affect you if you know that when you test a child at the very beginning? And so when and how information should be disseminated, I think it's also going to be a big conversation going forward. I'm done.
Great. Thank you, guys. I wish there was a class here that could clap for you, so I'm just going to clap right here. Yay. Seriously, thank you so much, especially for taking time out of your day, especially when things are so disrupted as they are right now. So just thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. And I think you guys are doing incredible work, and I hope that our students connect with you in the future, which kind of leads me to my last thing. If somebody that's listening to this wants to get connected with the work that you guys are doing, what would be some next steps for them?
Carl, you want to take that?
Well, for me, go to cincytechstudents.com. You can sign up to get some more information about project work. And we have internship opportunities. I'm also trying to get more news and events spaced out. You can also, there's a note section there. Say if you're looking, hey, can I connect because I want to learn more about one of these? Do you have any starting points for me? I'm happy to try to respond to those, as many as I can. And already with your students as well, you can share my email directly.
And we do at Clarigent Health. We're trying to keep this organized for the students. So all the internships that we have open and project work, we go through Cincy Tech, and then they go through Handshake to make that available. So it kind of makes it in a much more organized way for a student to be able to kind of scan through that to see where there's a good fit. But also at any time, if any of your students, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out. I'd be more than happy to answer questions.
Yeah, and there are you're still looking for candidates for the 2 internships this summer, correct, Marcy?
Yeah, we have our data science intern done, and we're still looking for QA and analytics, and then we're looking for a marketing intern.
So I will send I will send both of those to you directly. They are posted on Handshake. I'll send those to you directly as well to share with your students, as well as a design project to help Marcy and the team do some work, preparing material to go on their website. That's sort of short-term project over the next couple of weeks.
Awesome. Guys, again, thanks for your time. Also, just at a more holistic sense, thanks for your investing in this region. I, as a native Cincinnatian, are really excited about the kind of stuff that you guys are doing. So thanks for doing what you're doing, and we'll connect again later.
All right. Thank you, Artie. Thank you, Marcy.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.